24. Tapasocham daya satyam iti pada krite kritaha adharmam sai kriyo bhagna smaya sangha madaistava. Translation: the age of Satya, or truthfulness, your four legs were established by the four principles of austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. But it appears that three of your legs are broken due to rampant irreligion in the form of pride, lust for women, and intoxication. Report: the deluding energy or material nature can act upon the living beings proportionately in terms of the living beings falling prey to the deluding attraction of Maya. Moths are captivated by the glaring brightness of light, and thus they become prey to the fire. Similarly, the deluding energy is always captivating the conditioned souls to become prey to the fire of delusion. And the Vedic scriptures warn the conditioned souls not to become prey to delusion, but to get rid of it. The Vedas warn us to go not to the darkness of ignorance, but to the progressive path of light. The Lord himself also warns that the deluding power of material energy is too powerful to overcome, but one who completely surrenders unto the Lord can easily do so. But to surrender unto the lotus feet of the Lord is also not very easy. Such surrender is possible by persons of austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. These four principles of advanced civilization were remarkable features in the age of Satya. In that age, every human being was practically a qualified Brahman of the highest order, and in the social orders of life they were all Paramahamsas, or the topmost in the renounced order. By cultural standing, the human beings were not at all subjected to the deluding energy. Such strong men of character were competent enough to get away from the clutches of Maya. But gradually, as the basic principles of Brahminical culture, namely austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness, became curtailed by proportionate development of pride, attachment for women, and intoxication, the path of salvation, or the path of transcendental bliss, retreated far, far away from human society. With the progression of the age of Kali, people are becoming very proud and attached to women and intoxication. By the influence of the age of Kali, even a pauper is proud of his penny. The women are always dressed in an overly attractive fashion to victimize the minds of men, and the man is addicted to drinking wine, smoking, and drinking tea and chewing tobacco, etc. All these habits, or so-called advancement of civilization, are the root causes of all irreligiosities, and therefore it is not possible to check corruption, bribery, and nepotism. Men cannot check all these evils simply by statutory acts and police vigilance, but he can cure the disease of the mind by the proper medicine, namely advocating the principles of Brahminical culture, or the principles of austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. Modern civilization and economic development are creating a new situation of poverty and scarcity, with the result of black marketing this consumer's commodities. If the leaders and rich men of the society spend 50% of their accumulated wealth mercifully for the misled mass of people and educate them in God consciousness, the knowledge of Bhagavatam, certainly the age of Kali will be defeated in its attempt to entrap the conditioned souls. We must always remember that false pride, or too high an estimation of one's own values of life, undue attachment to women or association with them, and intoxication will divert human civilization from the path of peace, however much the people clamor for peace in the world. The preaching of the Bhagavatam principles will automatically render all men austere, clean, both inside and outside, merciful to the suffering, and truthful in daily behavior. That is the way of correcting the flaws of human society, which are very prominently exhibited at the present moment. Translation: in the age of Satya, or truthfulness, your 4 legs were established by the 4 principles of austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. But it appears that 3 of your legs are broken due to rampant irreligion in the form of pride, lust for women, and intoxication. So, here we have a very nice analysis by King Parikshit of the degradation that has taken place in Kali Yuga. In the previous verses he was talking about the inconceivable plan of the Lord, and we can't really blame a particular person for the bull being attacked by Kali. Here he takes a little bit of a different approach and speaks in terms of the legs of Dharma. So in Satya Yuga, the first of the ages, which is the best, we have intact tapa, or austerity, socha, cleanliness, doya, compassion, and satya, truthfulness. And progressively, as we go through the ages, which also decrease in the length of their period, the Yuga, Treta Yuga, we get 3/4 of these remaining. In Dwarpa, half. And in Kali Yuga, 1. So these are represented by the legs of the bull. The bull has 4 legs in Satya Yuga, 3 legs in Treta Yuga, 2 legs in Dwarpa Yuga, and 1 leg in Kali Yuga. So it was explained that the personification of Kali was attacking that last leg of the bull, Dharma. He was standing on 1 leg, and Kali was beating that leg so that the bull would fall over. So in other words, Dharma would be completely eradicated by the end of Kali Yuga. So we have 4 principles here which maintain Dharma. The first is called tapa, or austerity. The literal meaning of tapa, it comes from tap, which means to give pain or to burn. So the sun is called tapana because it burns. It's very hot in the summer. So of course people always have sufferings of some sort, but tapa in the spiritual sense means a voluntary acceptance of inconveniences of the body. Voluntary. This of course takes extreme measures in some practices of yoga and for some renunciates in which they will fast for long periods of time, live out in the cold weather, put fires around themselves in the hot weather, and meditate in the middle of the fires, even with fire on their head, with a pot of fire on their head, and they're sitting in the middle of all these fires in the middle of summer. So it's inconvenient for the body. And by these type of austerities, they become indifferent to the heat and cold of the body, etc. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, you should be indifferent to the changes of hot and cold, etc. in the material world. So persons trying to advance, they become completely detached from their material conditions. So that's the extreme of tapa. For the ordinary human being in following Dharma, tapa will mean that we accept the laws of Dharma that are prescribed in the scriptures, and we're willing to curtail our sense gratification to some degree according to the laws of Dharma. That is also painful for some people, but we voluntarily submit to that because we see the higher goal. So we know that persons in the mode of sattva, they will see the long-term goal, and what they're practicing may be inconvenient at the moment, like poison, but in the end it's like nectar. For a person in Rajagun, the austerity is, what activities they do are nectar in the beginning and poison at the end. They just try to enjoy their activities very nicely without any sense control, and then they end up suffering. A person in Tamagun, his activities are actually suffering from beginning to end. So the person in Sattva particularly is willing to look at the long-term goal, and he undergoes inconveniences seeing the long-term benefit of something. So that is what tapas does within the system of Dharma. People understand that they should restrict their senses, even though it is difficult to do so, because they know the long-term benefits of it. So that is, we can say, sense control, following the rules of sense control of the scriptures. And this will be various according to the types of people. So the Brahmins have more sense control rules than the Sudra, because they're more capable of controlling their senses. So tapa is there as one element within the varnashram system. Another is socha. We have external cleanliness, of course, and that's very important simply for physical reasons. And then we have internal cleanliness, which is very important also for spiritual purposes, or even for, we can say, peaceful living even in the material world. We need internal cleanliness, which means that the anarthas, or the desires, are under control. The first one, tapa, means that you are willing to submit to the rules of Dharma and control your senses. Socha, of course, means that we may have desires, but we control them also. We don't let those desires manifest as actions within this material world. And then we try to reduce those desires more and more until we no longer have those anarthas. So means someone practicing socha tries to reduce his material anarthas, material attachments, and consequently his sense control is easier. And of course the external one is, we may not put too much attention to the external cleanliness, but the Vedic literature has an understanding that the body, the environment, they have an influence upon your spiritual development, we can say, or at least we can say your development through the gunas. So if you don't have a clean environment and you have not a clean body, then you'll fall into the lower modes of nature. And then your activities will be lower modes of nature also. Whereas if you practice internal and external cleanliness, then it's easier to maintain your sense control, etc. So there is, the socha has significance also in terms of sense control. And doya, compassion. This is, we can say sometimes, okay, this humanitarianism and charitable nature, this is punya, and we often criticize people for concentrating too much on the compassionate aspect of Dharma. Yeah? And of course many religions concentrate on that. We'll see in Buddhism and Christianity they concentrate on charitable works. And then they look at ISKCON, what charitable works are you doing? And we say, well, you're going to think, okay, we feed people prasadam. Advaya, of course, if we look at it, we'll see that it's quite emphasized in the Bhagavatam, apart within devotional service itself, not just as a punya in the material world as part of varnashram system, but it is also part of the process of bhakti itself. However, we find that the application becomes a little bit different because we understand that the real mercy is to elevate a person beyond the material gunas, not simply to help the material body. So therefore, the way in which we apply that mercy is a little bit different. Nevertheless, it's also necessary to develop that attitude. And therefore, we'll find in the basic rules of bhakti in the first 20 items, one of the rules is don't disturb any living entity. Prani, any living entity, you're not supposed to unnecessarily disturb them. And then we'll find in the third canto, Kapila Dev has a whole section there on how you have to see the suffering of other living entities as your own suffering. Just as something happens to us and we suffer, we don't like it. So if we see the suffering of another living entity, we take that as our own suffering, and we don't like that also. So we try to alleviate the suffering of other living entities. So Kapila Dev is mentioning that in relation to the devotee as well. He has compassion for the fallen souls. And we see within the movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, some of the devotees were very compassionate to the jivas. And we find that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was also very compassionate. He's Supreme Lord, so he was most compassionate even to the aparadis and the fallen souls of Kali Yuga. So for that reason, Lord Chaitanya introduced Sankirtan to uplift even the most unqualified people in the material world. So Dvaya as an aspect spiritual, it is part of the Supreme Lord, and it's reflected in the devotees also. But as I said, we have a little bit of a different way of applying that Dvaya to the people. We try to give spiritual knowledge and upliftment rather than merely material charity. Within the Varnashram system, that Dvaya is emphasized in order to counteract the selfish tendency. Instead of doing for ourselves, we should do for others. So the lower we go in the gunas, the more selfish we become. So in tamagun, we're looking only at ourself. In rajagun, we'll look at ourselves and our immediate family members, and then we'll see how we can benefit them and ourselves. Charity is emphasized for all people in order to help them become detached from their selfish mentality and extend the border of their mercy to all people of the world and to all living entities. So we'll find that's emphasized. That's one of the main ways in which we counteract sin in the material world, by doing charitable activities, etc. And if it's done sincerely, then that counteracts the tendency to become selfish. So particularly for the Vaishyas who like to accumulate money, then they're also encouraged to be charitable, to counteract that selfish tendency of hoarding all your money. And the Kshatriya should have charitable nature also, because he has to protect the citizens and he has to support them in all cases, and if they're suffering, he has to alleviate their suffering. That's his duty. So therefore, in the Varnashram system itself, it is also an important element. The last element is truthfulness, or satya. This actually is also prevalent in the Varnashram system. Even the Sudra should be truthful. What to speak of the Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, and Brahmana, they should have an honest nature. So some qualities apply to all the members of the Varnashram system, and this is one of them. They have to be very truthful in their nature. This, of course, has a material connotation of, let's say, a law-abiding citizen, etc. But then we also have the higher truth. So that is, from the devotee's point of view, truth means absolute truth. We have to distinguish material morality from Bhagavat Dharma. Recognition of the Supreme Lord as the highest principle for all other moral principles or whatever principles we follow. Those who cannot go that far, at least they will follow the standards of Scripture for understanding what truth is, what is good, what is bad, etc. So they'll have some faith in the Scripture and the conclusions of Scripture. So these are the basis of the Dharma, which means the Varnashram system. And if these are intact, then that system goes along nicely, and the more these things are weakened, then the whole system becomes weakened, until in Kali Yuga, we got one leg left of Dharma, so that means very weak, and by the end of Kali Yuga, even that is gone. So that whole system gradually deteriorates from Satya Yuga to Kali Yuga, and at the end it's completely gone. So the system itself encourages these items. Of course, these are four main items, but we can also expand that. There's many other qualities that are important as well, but these are very important ones, so they're singled out. And the system itself encourages this. The problem is, if you have a good king, fine, he can implement this very nicely. But the system of simply applying moral rules does not work unless there is an element of recognition of a Supreme Lord who is the basis of all of that. And if people have faith in that Supreme Lord who is the basis for all the qualities that are to exhibit in this world, and they worship the Lord, they can become steady in manifesting these qualities. And if they don't, they can learn moral qualities: don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat, don't do this, don't do that, whatever. But it is somewhat artificial. And the only way it can work is by punishment. If you don't do it, you get punished. But then the problem with that is that the system is never perfect. So some people escape the punishment. And some people are very expert at escaping the punishment. So that when there's a loophole, then the people will not follow these principles. They'll do something the opposite, as long as they don't get punished. And then when we get the government is faulty, and the government is full of all problems, and they don't follow these principles, then they won't enforce these things at all. And people are very free to not follow the principles at all. So therefore, it's very, very difficult to enforce unless we do have a proper Kshatriya leader and a proper government to enforce all these activities. Even then, we have a nice, strong government, whatever. That person has to be proper, otherwise he gets bewildered. Prabhupada mentions in the purport about how Maya will attract everybody. So even that Kshatriya, if he's not strong enough, Maya will get hold of him and he will exploit everybody under him. And then all these principles again get finished. So to maintain this system, the system is mentioned in Scripture, the structure is there, everything, but it is a little bit difficult to maintain unless we have the proper persons in there. With the proper qualities. So among those qualities, they also have, the leaders especially, also have to be devotees. Then they can maintain these qualities properly, and they can inspire the people to follow the properties properly. So at the end of this purport, Prabhupada mentions how we have to inculcate these qualities. How do we inculcate all these principles, these qualities of mercifulness and truthfulness, etc.? By Krishna consciousness. If we are a devotee, then we can naturally manifest these qualities. And that means not only the leaders, but the citizens. And then when these qualities are very strong, it is not too difficult to make that the standard for society. So when we talk about a Varnashram system, then we also have to talk about a devotional system there behind it. The people have to be devotees, then the system will work properly. So the unfortunate position of Kali Yuga is that it's inevitable. It's, as Parikshit is defining here, that there's only one leg left. Dharma, these principles, 1/4, not 4 quarters as in Satya Yuga, 1/4 left of all these things. So it's a rather miserable position. And we see that after Parikshit's reign and a few of his followers after that, his descendants, then the whole system it collapsed completely. And there was no king. So how these principles can be maintained at all? So we have to start at the bottom again, and as devotees of the Lord, inculcate these principles along with our practice of bhakti, and spread that to the population. That seems to be the only solution of how to revive the elements of a varnashram system, by practicing devotional service and inculcating some of these principles of dharma within the society as much as possible. That's the only hope. Okay. Sounds like a harmonium.
In the third book, Srila Prabhupada makes a statement which I thought was quite interesting, and wondering if you could elaborate on a little bit. In Satya Yuga, every human being was practically a qualified Brahmin of the highest order, and in the social orders of life, they were all Paramahamsas, or the top ranks of the
That's the ashram, yeah. Yeah. So in Satya Yuga, it says Ekavarna. I think it's described in Brahma Vivarta Purana that formerly it was Ekavarna. I think also in Bhagavatam it describes that eventually when Treta Yuga came, then the Varnas started dividing up. But in Satya Yuga it was one Varna. So everybody was very pure.
But if they're all Paramahamsas,
how could they have children? I think it's not in the literal sense, but in the sense of Yukta Vairagya. Because also we see in Satya Yuga there were sages, but they were married, even some of the sages, so they weren't all Paramahamsa in the sannyas sense of the term, the highest level of sannyas, but in terms of be completely detached from material things, yes, but they did their duty as far as society is concerned. So that's another type of, we can say, sannyas, or we can say vairagya, without having to take the literal signs of sannyas, where we are detached and we do our duties, but we do it with complete obligation, but without attachment at all.
I wasn't thinking of Paramahamsa in the sense of sannyas, but more Paramahamsa in the sense of spotlessly pure.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is generally the way the Prabhupada uses it. So if
Yeah.
you're so spotlessly pure
Yeah.
in their spiritual practice, how do things degrade?
It's the nature of time. The Lord establishes a very nice system at the beginning of Satya Yuga, but we see by the end of Satya Yuga it starts declining, because suddenly when you get to Treta Yuga it's only 3/4 of Dharma. So there is an element of purity gradually creeping in. So the nature of the material world is it starts out nice, and then from any object we make, gradually it deteriorates until it breaks, you know. So the nature of material things is it goes towards tamas, it tends towards tamas. Everything breaks apart, everything falls apart. The whole universe finally falls apart, and it all gets absorbed into, Mahavishnu again. So this is the very nature of the world, but the Lord keeps trying to restore it. So, over and over throughout the 1,000 cycles in the day of Brahma, he restores it, and it goes down again. He restores it, and goes down again. Restores it, and goes down again. This, you can say, the natural cycle of material energy to go into a destructive mode.
So apart from the fact that the natural cycle and the degradation due to the influence of material nature, if you look at the beginning of Kali Yuga, the sages in Namakrishna, they sat down to perform a 1,000-year yajna, out for the benefit of the age. We don't hear of anything like that happening in Satya Yuga, for instance. Because obviously, if they're all situated in goodness, they could see how time and laws of nature are influencing. Therefore, did they do something to try to...
I don't hear of anything particular. But in spite of all that, in every yuga, along with the dharma and then the degradation of dharma, we get the yuga dharma, which is bhakti of some form or other, whether it is meditation or sacrifices or deity worship or sankirtan. That. So there's a continuous line of bhakti going on there in any case, no matter what the gunas are. Yeah? So that's the mercy of the Lord also, that no matter how much the world degrades due to the influence of time, still the Lord comes as an avatar and he introduces a method which is suitable for those people and which they can follow, so that they can actually elevate themselves within the lower gunas or the higher gunas.
Actually, my question is almost the same, Maharaj. It's incredible how it can degrade, and it seems like the Lord can very easily reset things, and when Kalki comes, he wipes out the demonic principles and builds the right goodness in the heart of it again. It's such a yuga begins again.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a very easy thing for the Lord to do, reset the order. So I'm just wondering, from our point of view, it seems like he waits a long time, hundreds of thousands of years, for things to get totally degraded to beyond madness, and then comes in like that and resets.
Easy for the Lord, like he creates the whole material world through the agency of Brahma. And then Brahma does it with his mind, not even with his hands. He just uses his mind, Brahma, to create all the living entities in their bodies and the planetary systems, etc. So he actually sets up that whole system. So we have the days of Brahma, and we have the cycles, 1,000 yuga cycles within that. Then we have the Manvantara cycles, the 71 yuga cycles there. And then Manu comes and puts his descendants there. All this is set up by the Supreme Lord, and it goes on as we could cyclic pattern, so to speak, taking into consideration the nature of material nature that's not perfect. In the spiritual world, you don't have to have cycles because nothing is destroyed. But here, everything goes towards destruction. So that's why there's cycles of creation, destruction.
Maharaj, just on the concept of steady stuff, and is there any sort of anything in the Shastras that talk about human beings in Satya Yuga concentrating in cities, because it seems like cities are sort of a place where you can develop your passion and ignorance, where in Kali Yuga here, like 80% of the population now lives in cities. So
I suppose what you could say there, I haven't heard any direct statements there, but obviously there seems to be cities at all times. Like Krishna has his Dwarka and he had Mathura and everything like that. And previously there were kings also, so the kings had cities in all the different ages. So, and that goes on all the way through the, whole Manvantara period and all the yugas, etc. So it's just a matter of emphasis. So unfortunately in our Kali Yuga, particularly, I don't know about other Kali Yugas, our Kali Yuga, the city becomes the center, and it's like an artificial type of economy based on the city and artificial needs, and then the agriculture gets neglected. So that's a bad imbalance, obviously. So that everything has to be balanced out nicely, and that's the responsibility of the government to make sure that everything is going on nicely. What happens in the modern world is all the farmers don't want to be farmers because it's too difficult. They can't make any money, or they just go bankrupt or whatever. And then the other alternative is to make these, commercial farms, industrial farms or whatever they call them, where they have thousands and thousands of acres and machines doing all the work, etc. But then the result of that is you exploit the earth too much, and then ultimately it backfires and everything ends up worse. The soil gets depleted, and maybe the weather changes or whatever. We don't know. All these things happen, and then you have genetic crops and so many other things coming in to try to make a profit. So everything becomes a profit-making venture in Kali Yuga, including the farming. So obviously not the proper way to go. Because there's lack of control, and the idea is to get profit, and the principles, 1/4 or less of Dharma is there, so everybody's getting very selfish, and they're trying to make more money for themselves. So the system doesn't work that way. Yeah.
It seemed like
Here Prabhupada says in Prabhupada, the rich people should give half their money. Give away half their money. That's the system. The king can enforce that, but Kali Yuga we don't do that.
It seemed like one of the major emphases of the class was about
yeah.
being the basis of human life.
Yeah, in the Varnashram system. Yeah.
And it seems like in Kali Yuga, these things just completely disappeared. I saw an interesting, wasn't actually very stupid, in one of the news sites. And the header of the article was, "Are we washing our hands too much?" And we got this interview with some guy, and the header of his interview was like, "I haven't washed in years, never did me enough." And it seems like, this background mentality that's there in Kali Yuga. How is it possible we're going to convince them to develop these qualities?
Yeah, very. We have very strange concepts of what's cleanliness even. They were also wondering why Japan didn't lock down everybody, but somehow they didn't. The virus didn't, spread. So they're wondering how did it happen in Japan that they didn't do that. So one is, they're a little cleaner. They take their shoes off before they go in the house so they don't spread the germs of the outside inside the house. They're taking baths every day. They're doing all this, They distance themselves from other people. So in this way, they said that maybe that's why, whatever. So this is, in other words, these things are foreign to most people of the world. Such a culture where you don't track your feet into the house and leave all the dirt in the house, etc.
I'm just curious as to what it would look like if a devotee were to get involved in politics, and how that process would look about if it was to be fully dedicated to Krishna consciousness, but at the same time having to deal with all the rubbish that's been made.
Yeah, it's a little difficult because, of course, it's a democratic system, and if you have a democratic system, then you have to somehow convince the population to vote for you first. So you would have to do that. We had a few devotee-like politicians in America. What's her name was there? Tulsi Gabbard. Well, she didn't make it too far, but she came from a devotee family, more or less like that, but she got a little bit outspoken, and she got crushed for that. So you do have to be a little clever in how you speak publicly and all these things if you want to get power, but then, of course, if they could get into power, then they could do something, but you can't do everything. Just like we have in India, we have Modi as the person, so he is somewhat dharmic and Krishna conscious, whatever, but he can't make blanket rules, stop all the slaughterhouses immediately, whatever. He does what he can, but he can't do everything immediately. He can do a little bit of something. So maybe it's this gradual process of converting society to get used to get one habit there and one law there. Then after you can put a little more, and as they get purified by the laws, then they can cooperate more and support more. So it's more likely a gradual process than a sudden process of persons.
In relation to the question of Srimad Bhagavatam about how is it possible if everyone is perfect in Satya Yuga, how do we degrade and we go to the rest of the yugas? I have the same question, but then thinking about it, in the Bhagavatam, you see many stories in Satya Yuga and people are not always pure.
Yeah. We see in Sargaloka, which is sattvic, we have the Deva just doing stupid things sometimes too.
So
or even Brahma.
The way I understand is that maybe the predominance was sattva-gun.
That's what it means. It's not pure. It's not pure. Otherwise, it would be the spiritual world.
Like Dhruva Maharaj was in Satya Yuga, isn't it?
It doesn't say what yuga, but he was in Swayambhuva Manvantara, which is millions and millions of years ago.
Still there was,
Yeah. And even the kings aren't proper sometimes. They get jealous or they show favoritism or whatever. So it's the material world, and people have faults. Even if you're sattvic prominently, you can make mistakes or whatever, and like that. And whether it's Satya Yuga or Kali Yuga, even if you're an ideal person, you're bound to have faults or whatever, and that can cause a lot of problems. Okay, Hare Krishna.